Thank you, President Moran Adams. So 90% of what you need to know about Josh is that he's super tall. And, there are all these psychological studies that say just, super tall folks do better. And you will hear in his speech today, the other 10%, which that he is a brilliant servant leader. And he would say that he isn't, and I'm right and he is wrong. So he is the CEO of QuantHub, which is a Birmingham-based education technology company that helps people prepare for data-driven future. He will talk about that and talk about things that are in a way better way than I can. He is an inveterate entrepreneur. He was the founder and CEO of StrategyWise, an award-winning data science and AI consulting firm. They worked with top companies all over the world, from Samsung to Toshiba. He's worked at 6 startups in 40 countries in 7 languages. And all of that stuff is very impressive. And then you spend time with Josh, and what you're really impressed by is the guy is addicted to learning. He's always asking questions. Any opportunity he has to learn something from another human being, from something he reads, from an experience he is soaking it up at all times. There is just no, despite a cause for it, there's just no ego there. He is trying to get better. But the other piece you recognize when you talk to Josh is he cares so deeply about Birmingham. He's not just raising his 3 daughters here with his wife Akiko. He really cares deeply about this place, and he goes out of his way to care deeply about this place. Don't let him leave this stage before he talks about the internship program that Kelsey's running and the opportunity we have to welcome great interns next summer. You all should be asking him about that. Don't let him leave the stage without him talking about what he cares about, Culture City, and all of the different ways he's gone to bat to make sure that nationally recognized program gets the kind of support it needs in order to help folks who have autism and make it a great experience for them all over the country. Josh is just, if you sit down with Josh, you're going to have a good time. You're going to learn something. You're going to laugh, and you're going to leave fired up about not just what he's working on, but the idea that we get to be in Birmingham and be among folks like him. Please welcome Josh Jones.
JW, thank you so much for that introduction. I just wish my parents could have been here to hear it, because I know my father would have loved it and my mother would have believed it. So very briefly, as JW shared, I've worked in a number of different companies and startups for the last 25 years in a number of different technology related spaces. I'm all really sitting at the translation spot between the server room and the boardroom, understanding over the years how technology impacts companies, but how we can get past the hype and really understand how we can leverage whatever that new technology is to really create meaningful impact in our world, whether that's in a for-profit setting or a nonprofit setting. So again, I will stay around afterwards if I don't have time to cover everything. I know he set up quite an agenda for me there, but really wanted to talk to you guys today about artificial intelligence and how it's changing the world. But first, very briefly, just to give you current context on QuantHub, the company that is based here in Birmingham that I'm privileged to be CEO of and have some of my great team members here in the audience. We are a micro-learning platform that assesses and teaches data skills. And data skills can be anything from what is a dashboard or what is data, how do I use that to make better data-driven decisions, to how do I use data to tell better stories, to the more advanced stuff like machine learning and artificial intelligence. And so our platform delivers this in micro-learning 5 to 10 minute segments, sometimes a little bit longer in a corporate setting. And we also do it in the school setting as well. So the state of Alabama, for example, has rolled out QuantHub all across the state. So we're now teaching kids in middle school and high school data skills, which I think we all would agree are so increasingly important as we see things like some of the stuff we'll talk about today are dramatically changing the jobs and the careers around us. And so we're really delighted to be partnering with the state of Alabama to roll this out, and now in talks with a number of other states as well about future possible opportunities. So again, if we have a few minutes towards the end of the conversation today, I'll be glad to talk more about that. So before I jump in, a quick story. I've given this talk a number of times the last couple of months, and every time I do, I kind of change half the slide deck because everything is changing so fast. So started having chest pains and tried to power through it. And I'm at that age now where I'm finally like, okay, I got to do something about this. So I go to an urgent care clinic and they do all the tests and blood tests and EKG and everything. Thankfully, everything was fine. It was probably something musculoskeletal or whatever. But as I often do to the annoyance of my friends and family, I ran everything through ChatGPT just to see what ChatGPT, Dr. GPT would have said under those circumstances. Any doctors in the room? No, we're in trouble. Okay, we got a few in the back there. So this is definitely not medical advice, but I thought I'm going to upload just this photo to the app and see what it says. So I said, and this is a shortened version. It gave me all these legal disclaimers: go to the hospital, don't talk to me. And then I finally said, pretend you're a cardiologist. What do you make of this EKG? That did the trick. And so it starts giving me all these in-depth analyses of my uh, physical situation. I never heard of a QRS, but apparently it's slightly elevated. So I asked it what it would make of that. It starts giving me all of these intervals, durations, and really just fascinating conversations. So I'm like, all right, we'll put that in the table. It just back and forth, back and forth. And I was pretty impressed by this. It basically told me the same thing that my doctor told me. I sent it to a doctor friend of mine. I sent him the whole conversation. I said, what do you make of this? And he said, it's actually pretty good. So um, the problem with this is that you can't fool around with the fact that it's 90% right. So I don't recommend that you do this. It really is in still an academic setting. But for me, it was a very interesting experience to see how far this has come. Because really, even 6 months ago, I couldn't have uploaded the image. I would have had to just type all of this in. And I'm sure all of you have heard cocktail party stories about ChatGPT. So my goal here today is not to drone on and on about different applications, but I wanted to share this with you because it really is a fascinating to think about where we've come the last year and to forecast that in the next couple of years. I think everybody's mind wonders. And that's where some of this hype gets created about where are we going? How fast is this going? And we start sort of making our own assumptions and leaps into where we're headed. And so really what I wanted to do today is have a conversation with you guys around artificial intelligence. And apologies if I bore the AI professor in the room, but I wanted to give you sort of some context around how we got here. I want to explain machine learning to you all, not comprehensively and not technically, but enough that you can walk away and explain it to JW and he'll actually understand. From there, I'd like to talk about some present applications, and I'm just going to kind of bounce around a little bit. There's no really rhyme or reason. I honestly, it's like just, playing a jukebox. Let's do this one, this one, this one. So I'm happy to dig further. And I try to think of some personal applications, some business, and some ways that you could take this home. And then in the third part of the talk, I'm going to talk about the future. We'll look at a couple of statistics, but really grapple with this issue. When is AI going to replace all of our jobs and take over the world? And so hopefully in the next couple of minutes, we'll get through all of that. So let's start with some context. So a man named Gordon Moore co-founded Intel a number of years ago. And in the 70s, he sort of coined this phrase that we started calling Moore's Law. And the idea is that the number of transistors on a microchip is doubling every couple of years and the price is dropping by half. Now, what's fascinating about this graph is that this has continued and continued. And if you're like me, you start thinking, surely this is going to plateau at some point. Like we can't just keep going on and on and on. So about 5 years ago, I gave a TEDx talk and I used this as an example of just the latest in technology. Now this on the, I guess it's everybody's right, is IBM's smallest computer at the time. It's about the size of a grain of rock salt. And it's the equivalent of a computer you might have had in the 1990s. It cost about 10 cents to manufacture. And that one on the finger, there's 64 of those combined. Pretty impressive, right? So this is 5 years ago. This thing's about a millimeter by a millimeter, so a millimeter squared. So this is, as of a couple of months ago, the newest world's smallest computer. And it's 0.3 millimeters. So square inch, millimeter inch, whatever, about a tenth of the size. And that's a grain of rice that it's sitting next to. So that's about a tenth of the width, not the length, but the width of a grain of rice. So this is a couple of months ago. So if that gives you any perspective, this is not stopping, right? And this is a sensor. It's a computer that captures data, and data can be anything and everything around us, from photos, from a heartbeat monitor, you name it. So it's probably not any surprise to anyone in this room to see a graph like this, where we see the exponential growth in the amount of data worldwide. One way to think about it is imagine how many photos you might have on your phone today. Try taking those photos and putting them in the phone you had 4 or 5 years ago, right? They would just wouldn't fit. It would fill up the memory. And at the same time, what we're seeing is the processing power of computers is getting better, and the cost per dollar is dropping exponentially. Okay, so those two trends are really important for us to think about if we want to understand how did we get ChatGPT sneaking up on us like it did. So this trend of the amount of data that we have to use in a meaningful way is increasing exponentially. The cost for us to do something with this data is dropping at the same time. So when you bring those together, you get some amazing things. And let me walk you through how this actually works. So image recognition is one of these common applications of computing, of artificial intelligence. And so let's go through this process of, let's say we upload this image to a computer. So how does a computer actually figure out what this is? Well, the first thing you might do is essentially break this down into a series of pixels. And this could be represented by numbers that are just how dark is each one of these pixels or how much color. So we would turn this into a number, right? And so as we look at those numbers, we can start looking for associations between each of those pixels. Now, how many people in the room have a drawer like this in their home? So I think we have 3 now. But imagine for a moment that we wanted to sort this and make sense of all of this junk, if you will. Well, one of the things that we could do is pull out one of the great inventions, the coin sorter 4000, right? And all this thing does is you put a bunch of coins into a bucket, you start winding that crank, and it's going to push them down this little conveyor belt, and the coins will drop based on the size of the coin, right? So we get these nice 4 buckets where we've classified what is an unknown jumble of items into 4 general buckets based on 1 parameter, right? The parameter is the width of that coin. So essentially, this is as technical as we'll get today. This is basically, if you think about a neural network, if you've seen these in the news or anywhere else, all we're really doing here is each one of these layers that we're passing this piece of data or image or whatever it is through, we're running it through one series of parameters to say, what is one little feature? Is that a nose? Is that an ear? Well, you break it down further. Well, how do we know it's a nose? Well, this pixel ends up next to this pixel, and so forth and so on. But if you think about that, like that's a lot of layers to actually get to something meaningful, right? And that's the reason that we're seeing this growth in recent years is because in order to do this, you got to have a lot of training data to figure out what these things are. But then you also have to have a lot of processing power to actually go through this process. Now, the opposite is true as well, that if we know what these things are like and we save that, we can flip it, and then we can start creating things. And so if we look at the progression of something like actually creating an image from scratch, so we're going to use AI to create a fake, face. This is the best we could do in 2014, so 10 years ago, right? So it's actually a lot better than it was 20 years, 30 years prior. But think again about those exponential curves, more data, more processing power. All of a sudden, we're starting to get better and better and better at creating images because we've got more data and more processing power to do that. So these are not real people. This is from a website called thispersondoesnotexist.com. And they look pretty impressive. Now, these are created by an AI tool called Midjourney. And these are, again, not real people, just photorealistic images. At the same time, imagine we get more processing power, more money, and we can actually start doing the same thing with audio. We can bring that together. We can do that with video. So the best video I could find that's a deep fake from a couple of years ago would be this one right here. Okay. I just.
I am not Morgan Freeman. What you
now.
see is not real. Well, at least in contemporary terms, it is not. What if I were to tell you that I am not even a human being? Would you believe me? What?
Okay, so I'll keep going. That's an example of a deep fake about 2 years ago. So you can get a sense of how we're continuing to progress in believability. Even this week, I think there was some news about some Biden deepfakes calling folks in New Hampshire, telling them to not vote or whatever the case may be. So let me wrap up this context section. I really, again, wanted to give you a look behind the scenes of roughly how this is happening when we talk about these things, but also to put on your radar to be thinking about what does this look like as we move forward, get more data, more ability to take this to the next level. So when we hear this term artificial intelligence, which is grossly overused, it's really using computers to see, hear, or sense. So think about what we were just talking about, recognizing images, recognizing audio, interpreting this into something meaningful, and then perhaps outputting this, say, show, or do. So think of it as like sense, think, and respond. So this is different than traditional computer programming. It's different than a lot of just everything that runs on a computer is not AI, but every marketing department wants to slap that on the label these days. But essentially, this is what we're talking about when we say artificial intelligence. It's part of this process. So generative AI is essentially predicting, given a data set, what is the next thing that would come given a particular prompt or suggestion. So for example, if I prompt you with this image and this movie quote, you could probably fill in the gaps of what the next word is going to be there, right? So shaken, not stirred. And so when we hear things like ChatGPT, there are large language models that are predicting this, essentially that's all that's happening at a very large scale with a lot of computing power behind it, is that these models have been trained that given a particular quote or prompt, here's the most likely output. So I think when we have these conversations around hallucinations and things like that, essentially what people are missing is it's getting so smart, it's fooling them. And so they forget that, hey, it's actually just predicting what's going to be next. It's not actually telling me with 100% certainty. So with that, let's jump around to a handful of applications. Again, I'll show you some personal ones and around the world. This one's kind of interesting. For those of you that don't have it, I highly recommend GPT-4. You have to pay about $20 a month for it. Great app. You can, again, use things like photos. You can talk to it, and it'll talk back to you. My daughter came in the other night, asked me for help on her homework. I was running out to a dinner, and I didn't have time, but I felt bad about saying, tough luck. And so I said, well, here, give me your homework. And so it's English, and she's got to read passages and respond on tone, connotation, and mood. I take a picture of it. I say, ChatGPT, help my daughter study for this, create a similar passage, and ask her questions about tone, connotation, and mood. And it creates new passages. It lets her answer them, and then it grades her answers based on how she did. And essentially, I handed her my computer. I left for the dinner. I came back later and I looked, and she had probably spent 30 or 45 minutes on this. I mean, she was just studying for a test, and she just went one exercise after the other, and it was pretty impressive. And I was thinking about how would I have done that if I had had to coach her on tone, mood, and all. And I think I got a C in my 6th grade English class. And so, again, there's a lot of ways that we're beginning to use it, just very simple around the house type stuff. Again, we won't spend too much time on that today. But here's one you might use in the office. Anybody here ever make presentations? Anybody? Handful of folks. This is in Microsoft PowerPoint, and they changed the name once or twice. I think it's Presenter Coach, but in your PowerPoint, you can click on Rehearse with Presenter Coach. And as you go through the PowerPoint presentation, it will record you, and it will give you feedback on your pitch, your tone, your pace, whether you're using the words too much. It's a pretty interesting AI tool that's sort of hidden in plain sight. Here's another one. This was from an early version of Adobe Photoshop Beta. Notice I'm expanding. I want to expand the width of this image. It has this tool called Generative Fill. This is now available in every version. You can also basically just highlight part of the image, and you can say, hey, I want a Ferris wheel, or add I think it's a family on a picnic. You'll notice I'm just typing in here a couple of text prompts. Think about how this is impacting marketing agencies. And I'm talking to folks that are saying this is really impacting the number of people that they're having to have work on projects. Kat doing yoga, of course, obligatory addition there. We're seeing this in programming. So whereas before, I think we're all used to our computer sort of offering the next word, like as we're typing an email, but now it's essentially offering entire paragraphs or entire pages or entire applications. So products like, or really even ChatGPT, GitHub's Copilot does this. There are a number of these tools that do it. And when you add in their multilingual support, the ability for teams across countries to program in a way that is just so much faster, this right here is going to be a huge accelerant when we think about the cost to deploy software into the field and everything that we've had to do previously. I've heard people that are using this extensively say it's about as good as using an offshoring firm overseas. So you're going to get about 80% right. You're still going to have to come back through this and modify it yourself as you go through. I thought I would give this a try. And I have a 3D printer in my shed in the backyard. And so I thought, I'm going to see if I can get this to actually help me print an object. So I'm just going to say like create a hexagon, and it wouldn't create a 3D printer file. So I said, well, which is called an STL file. I said, well, write me a Python script that will create this for me. It said, oh, I can do that. And then I remembered I didn't know how to write Python. So I said, well, help me get Python installed. So it walked me through how to install Python. I get all these errors. I copy and paste the errors back in the GPT, and it says, well, here, go type this. And pretty much every single time it fixed the errors. And by the time this was done, I was running Python, exporting scripts to my 3D printer, and pretty impressed that I was able to do all this in about 30 minutes from a coffee shop. So this was just me playing around with figuring all this out. You'll see in a second here, where I actually dump it into a 3D printer file. And while it may look complex, again, what you're not seeing is me just saying, what in the world did that just say? What did that mean? What did that mean? So forth and so on. So even helping someone who has never programmed before jump into it and actually create something meaningful, I think is going to dramatically change the way that code and software is engineered in years to come. So there's my little hexagon that I was able to print. Okay, medicine. I talked earlier about my experience with ChatGPT recently. Google actually has a version called MedPalm. MedPalm 2 is essentially think about ChatGPT as trying to train on everything. Now we're getting hyper-tuned models that focus on a particular industry. And so in medicine, what they're seeing with MedPalm 2, it's past the medical pass mark. And if you look at the actual clinical responses, in many cases, it's far beating the clinician answers when you just compare MedPalm answers to the typical clinician. And this is really interesting to me because I think in all circumstances of what we're seeing is more of a co-pilot approach of, let's not just give this to the public and say, diagnose your own chest pains, but it's more of, hey, if someone is talking to a doctor and they're wondering, is there something I'm missing here? Imagine being able to reach out to every PubMed and NIH and also say, okay, this is what I think, what are you seeing? And so this concept of a co-pilot, I think, is really going to see what we're going to see in market in the coming years. A quick example or analogy of this is with driverless cars, right? We're still not comfortable enough, except for in San Francisco, to have driverless cars completely like autonomous vehicles doing their own thing in the streets. But if you look at the actual safety numbers in general, they're a lot safer than the humans. And I think it's really that high stakes question of nobody wants to be wrong on a medical diagnosis. And so you're going to see a little bit more lagging there. But imagine the fields where the stakes are lower, where we say, you know what, I can afford to be 90% right on this, or I know that the alternative is usually 80% right. So more and more, we're going to see some interesting progression there. I mentioned the co-pilot situation. Again, we're already seeing things like AI-assisted colonoscopies being much, much more effective than those being done by the doctors alone. I showed you an example of the image earlier. Again, it's doing X-ray analysis as well. I didn't have time for it today. I uploaded the images from my medical visit as well. And again, after 3 pages of legal disclaimers, I was finally able to get it to talk to me about my chest X-rays. So that's pretty neat. So at the end of the talk, I will have a QR code where you can download this presentation deck if anyone's interested. Here is a wheel with 120 different startups that are doing interesting things in different types of generative AI across productivity, marketing, writing, and so forth. All right, let's talk about what's next. We'll spend a few minutes on this, and then I'm happy to answer some questions. So a couple months ago, researchers discovered that they could use audio through Zoom, and if you're typing your password, they could figure it out with 92% accuracy in less than a minute. And so our security protocols are going to change dramatically. They're going to have to. Just the amount of technology that creates opportunities for bad actors, we're going to see that accelerating. At the same time, we're going to see responses to that accelerating. So here's an example of 2 source images. And if you add a prompt like 2 men in a wedding or a man sitting in a metro, here's the output that you would generally see from generative AI. Pretty compelling from a deepfake perspective. However, this is an MIT study that was released a couple months ago. They've created a couple of different what they call attacks. It's actually protective. One's called a encoder attack, one's called a diffusion attack. But the goal is to trick the generative AI. So if it takes your image, think like as a watermark, when someone tries to use that for malicious purpose, it would essentially sort of throw the computer off. So you can see the one all the way on the right actually does a much better job of sort of eschewing that process. So we're going to see more reactions and more responses to things like this. And I think one of the things to remind you all of is when Photoshop became, pretty much widely available, call it 15, 20 years ago, there was this short period where fake images were coming out and people were believing them and then getting wise to it. Oh, that was Photoshopped. Remember, that's like an actual verb, like, oh, that was a Photoshopped image. And so for a while, we had this full trust. If we see it in an image, it's got to be real. And then Photoshop allowed people to start doctoring images to the point where like, okay, maybe that was Photoshopped. We're essentially going to see that continue from a generative AI standpoint, but you're also going to have to factor in things like audio, video, and so forth. And companies like Bank of America are going to have to think about what happens when someone calls in and does voice authentication, but it's a deep fake voice authentication. How do we want to deal with that? And so we're going to see a lot of money spent in this area and essentially an arms race to start thinking about how do we counteract some of the issues that are arising there. Just in terms of industry trends, I don't know if you can read this very well. This is an Accenture graph that essentially shows us they're estimating about 40% of all jobs are going to be impacted meaningfully over the next couple of years from a generative AI standpoint. And the darker blue is higher potential for automation. That lighter blue is higher potential for augmentation. So pretty substantial. And I think what's really surprised everyone is 10 years ago, we would have guessed it would be the manufacturing, the ag, anything where you could stick a robot. But because generative AI's ability to create text really impacts everything from accounting to legal, what we're seeing is it's really those white collar jobs that are being impacted in a much more meaningful way in the coming years. But I like to think about what Mark Andreessen says. And essentially, to sum it all up, is that technology allows us to create new things. It allows us to be innovative. And anyone who thinks, so it's going to take away our jobs, I think you're starting with a false notion that there's only so many jobs in the world. And if AI takes one, well, we're down one job. When in fact, I don't know if it's the opposite, but really what we're seeing here is that technology is going to create new jobs. McKinsey points out that about every 10 years, 10% of jobs are net new anyway. This was in the Denver airport a couple of days ago. I don't know if you guys are noticing this, but this whole idea of a retail clerk is really going away fast. And it used to be, a bunch of registers and there's one person. I took this photo because in this case, there is no person. It's just, I'm sure they have a security camera somewhere, but you're seeing more and more. So jobs like this. And I think we're all accustomed to and used to the idea, okay, there's going to be some rotation. Some jobs are going to fade out and new jobs are going to come in and replace that. And so what I would challenge you to be thinking about is what are those new jobs or what are the ways that we're changing our industry? And instead of being afraid of, okay, AI is going to take everyone's jobs, what are some of the things that we're doing that are inefficient or that could be done with AI or some other data tool that might actually make us more innovative and able to create new jobs? And so if you look at this chart, those that are in dark blue are occupations that didn't exist in 1940. So we're seeing a lot of just new job growth. We're seeing folks like ARK Invest and Kathy Wood estimate that generative AI is going to create 6 to 9% GDP growth. Goldman Sachs, similar number, 7%. You're seeing a lot of folks in industry begin to say, this is actually going to be a driver of innovation as we move forward. One more quick study, National Bureau of Economic Research. They studied over 8 years, 16 different countries in European Union and looked at how software impacts their employment. And what they found is that industries where software and artificial intelligence were meaningfully used, employment actually increased compared to those that did not. So I would argue that AI is not going to be a pure negative or positive. If anything, it's going to be a positive, but there is going to be an acceleration of this shedding of jobs and how we think through what is the new and what are the old jobs that are out there. So let's talk for just a minute, and I'll wrap up here about finding the sweet spot for generative AI. When should you use this in your work or whatever personal settings, and when should you not? And this chart shows you the validation effort. How hard is it to validate that this is true? Up and down on the y-axis is your generation effort. So something like creating marketing copy for a website is probably something you should use it for, because it's easy to validate, is it any good, and it's relatively painstaking to actually create the articles. Similarly, maybe making a modification to a photo, again, the cat doing yoga, we can kind of verify, yes, that is a cat doing yoga. On the other hand, and David will appreciate this, drafting a contract without legal expertise. It's fairly high to do, but the validation for someone who's not an attorney is fairly hard. So this is probably something that you should not do. However, if you have legal expertise, then maybe drafting a contract, it might be worth using GPT, because you can go through it yourself and validate, yes, this is something that's going to help me save time. All right, a couple of things to look out for in the years to come, 2024 and beyond, doing more with less. We're going to see models not necessarily just continue to peak on more magic tricks, if you will, but we're going to see them able to do it on less processing power, more on local computers versus large mainframe servers, things like that. So we'll start seeing efficiency come up. We'll see hyper-tuning with domain-specific models. So think like MedPalm, ChatGPT for law. There's one called Harvey.ai now. So you'll start seeing these industry verticals pop up. Augmented reality is an interesting one. We'll see how Apple's new product does, but expect this to be a little bit of a dark horse candidate to really create some disruption in the years to come. But also the exponential curve and just the lowering of the software cost to create new software applications is really going to change the playing field. For those of you that are in or near technology, if you remember 2010 to 2012, when we got cloud computing, AWS, Azure, all these things came on the market. Until that point, if I wanted to be a data scientist or do anything meaningful with computers, I had to go buy computers. I had to get a server room. I had to hire six-figure salary IT professionals to be able to even start. And now I can go get a free trial with Microsoft and get $25,000 worth of server credit. So literally anyone in this room could leverage those same computers with $0 out of pocket. And that really created a new playing field for startups to start experimenting with data science and AI. And I think we're going to see this in the next couple of years. So keep in mind, whether you're investing in the stock market or making your own corporate decisions, what are some of those game-changing decisions that we need to look for those startups coming out of left field, if you will. All right, so 8%. I want you all to remember this number. I made it up yesterday. It has no meaning other than this. Think about how you can get an 8% gain in personally or in your business in 2024 through using technology. Again, not life-changing. The reason I throw this number out there is because I see a lot of executives when I give this talk in corporate strategy rooms, there's this sense that we need to hit a grand slam. There's this sense that we got to put all of our money in generative AI. And so I wanted to say 5%, but I'm going to go 8 because this is a stretch goal, right? So be thinking about what are some of these minor tweaks that I can make from an efficiency standpoint in the way that I'm doing this. Maybe it's writing emails for me. Maybe I'm trying Grammarly or something like that. But what can I look for personally and in my team to just push us a little bit forward? And I feel like if you do this, it'll be a good pace in the sense that you're keeping up with it. You're not trying to be bleeding edge and invest in stuff that's just hype, but at the same time, making some progress. So I mentioned QuantHub up front. As an organization, we're really committed to helping people be data fluent. We also use the phrase data literacy, but this is really just this idea of like the talk today, understanding how are data and technology changing the world around us. And we want people to understand what is the art of the possible. How can we use data to make better decisions, to speak confidently about it wherever we are and what we're doing. And so very briefly, per JW's request, I'll mention that we are in schools across the state of Alabama, and kids are learning these things. They're learning about how data applies. And one of the things that we're doing this year that was funded by Innovate Alabama, Dr. Kelsey Bickett's here. She's running an internship program for us. And essentially, we're taking the best and brightest kids. We're focusing on those in rural and underserved areas, and we're connecting them with corporate partners to get them internships in their junior and senior year. It's a relatively short program. We originally were asking companies to pay, and we said, fine, QuantHub will pay them. So you don't even have to pay them. We just want you to sign up for the program, and we'll actually give them a stipend to do it. Our goal is to get kids in rural and underserved areas to be thinking about these types of jobs, because it's tremendously transformative when you give someone the ability to create essentially capital equipment without having to get a bank loan. And so this is something that we're really excited about. Would love for you to chat with our team if you're interested in getting one of the top kids in Alabama who's enthusiastic about this to come into your company and tackle a small summer project, whether that's some data cleansing or something along the research lines. So with that, I know we've got just a few minutes left. I will be more than happy to answer any questions. And here's a QR code for anyone who wants to grab this slide deck. Thank you. Victor? Shameless plug, you can sign up for our newsletter, and every week we give a couple of tidbits that you can learn. I just subscribe to a handful of different newsletters and news feeds, and because I give this talk, I'm constantly looking just to see what's out there. It is pretty well covered in your common, Wall Street Journal and New York Times. There's certainly some good articles out there. Our newsletter basically will feature like one or two just tidbits every week, and I'm sure there are some other newsletters out there as well. I do have a child going off to college. So she wants to study, I think it's called cytogenetics. I still can't pronounce it. It's some form of drug discovery. And she went through a UAB program that really got her excited about that. So I told her, I said, you do whatever you want to do. Just realize that AI is going to be impacting every field around you. In her field, it means instead of looking through a microscope, she's going to be looking at a computer monitor more and more. And so encouraging her to be proficient in things like Python and understand. Again, it's one of those things that it used to be only the computer scientists would need to do something like Python, but I think more and more everyone needs to be more adept with those tools. And so personally, I have 3 daughters. They all got a Homewood. I told them they could get a degree in anything they wanted as long as one of their degrees was management. And I said that, I was actually serious. And the idea is, so Naomi, my oldest, for example, so she's going to do University of Alabama's honors program with their STEM MBA. And the idea is, master your field or your specialty, but also understand how business works and how all these different pieces fit together. And so I think increasingly I will be saying, and there's got to be a side of some form of data literacy, data fluency. Now, my kids' case, they actually I'm forcing them to be beta testers in our program, so they're learning it whether they like it or not. So, yes, sir. I would suggest switching more and more towards the strategic side of the question. And I think we had this debate with calculators years ago. Why should you learn how to do something if it's done in a calculator? And there's still some practical skills that we need to know for when we don't have a calculator. I think we think about it in a similar terms of what are the things that generative AI can do really well, and what are the areas where the human can come into the play. One of the things that we got to be careful about is if we let every single article out there be written by generative AI, you have some real bias problems, you have some model problems that really is going to create issues as we move forward. And so we desperately do need humans writing content. I've been using AI for some form of it for 10 years now to correct my grammar. And I think everybody's kind of comfortable with the computer saying, hey, you spelled that wrong. And so I think it's to some degree, I'm seeing innovative professors actually think through, okay, this is the new world. I've got to deal with it. How do I create a lesson knowing that they're going to do this to some point? And again, the accuracy is not there. That we're seeing, attorneys get in trouble for citing cases that don't exist. We're seeing a lot of different scenarios where that's happening. So I think more than ever, and Wikipedia is another example. For years, it was like, do not touch Wikipedia. And now in many cases, people say, okay, it can be a decent source. So it is a battle that we have to fight through. So if you guys don't mind, what I'd love to do is, I know we're just about out of time. I'll stick around here and answer more questions, but if it's okay with you, I have a 3-minute video I'd love to show of some teachers and some administrators talking about QuantHub in the school system, which I love seeing it. And I'm just going to show that real quick, and we'll definitely be happy to hang around as long as you guys like afterwards. If I can go backwards.
I think learning about data at my age can help to cement that into your mind, because most jobs now and in the future will require knowing about data. QuantHub does learning in a really engaging way.
Before QuantHub, I didn't really notice the data around me. I wasn't really all that attuned to it, but then we used it and it taught me these terms, and reading the articles, going through and seeing the different terminologies and how, looking at student examples and seeing how it is in my everyday life. It's shown me how it is around me in day to day.
Data literacy is becoming one of the most important things that we can teach students. We as teachers struggle with gaining and engaging students because they're always on their phones, they're always on their devices. And QuantHub does a phenomenal job of not just teaching them, but how to understand and learn for themselves and research for themselves.
Data literacy and data skills are an essential part of almost every job that's out there. So the more we can start integrating this into the classroom at the high school level, then the more we are preparing them, whether they choose college or workforce career after their K-12 education, they are prepared for what's next for them.
My experience with QuantHub has been exceptional. I think it was a very innovative product to introduce to my classroom this year. My students were able to learn at their own pace. They were able to really understand data at a more individualized level for what they needed. As a teacher, that's all you can ask for, is a program or a system that helps me to reach students individually.
Some of the biggest pieces of feedback we get from the workforce community is that the students need to be able to read data. They need to be data literate. QuantHub definitely is a piece that will help us to meet that demand and that need. QuantHub has been outstanding. It is effective, it is efficient, and most of all, the students enjoy it.
I work in Phoenix City, and at the time I started working there, I would say 70% of our kids were what we consider in the poverty line. So for majority of them, they don't get access to digital media or computer science or the things that are STEM related. And so when we're able to give these kids free access to information in this digital world, I mean, you open up so many doors. Just think about it, where athletics used to be the doorway for kids to get out of poverty. We can allow STEM to be the doorway for kids to get out of poverty, to change their entire family's dynamic. You open up a world to kids that have been closed off to it their entire lives. It's like taking a child to Disney World, but in a digital way.